in a locked room where every choice cuts deeper than the last. Survival demands a price no one is ready to pay. Asterisk, the air was thick with the smell of rust and damp concrete. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, his head pounding like someone had driven a nail through his skull. His mouth tasted of metal and his wrists burned. He tried to move, but a sharp tug stopped him. Cold steel bit into his skin. He was chained. His wrists were locked in heavy cuffs, each attached to a chain that snaked across the floor and bolted into the wall behind him. Panic surged, but his body felt sluggish, like he'd been drugged. He blinked, trying to make sense of the dim room. It was small, maybe 10 feet by 10, with cracked concrete walls and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The light buzzed, casting jagged shadows. Across from him, slumped against the opposite wall, was another man. His head was down, his dark hair matted with sweat or blood. Ethan couldn't tell. The man's wrists were chained to, and his ankles were bound to a rusted pipe running along the floor. "Hey," Ethan's voice cracked, hoarse and weak. "Hey, wake up." The man stirred, groaning. He lifted his head slowly, revealing a bruised face. His left eye was swollen shut and dried. Blood crusted his lip. He looked at Ethan, confused, then tugged at his chains, wincing as they bit into his skin. Where are we?" the man mumbled. His voice was low, like he hadn't spoken in days. "I don't know," Ethan said, his heart racing. "What's your name?" The man blinked, as if trying to remember. "Mark. I think Mark. I'm Ethan." He yanked at his chains again, but they didn't budge. The cuffs were tight, cutting into his wrists every time he moved. He looked around, searching for anything that could help. The room was bare except for a small metal table in the center. On it sat a rusty hacksaw, a folded piece of paper, and a small tape recorder. Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't random. Someone had put them here. Mark followed Ethan's gaze to the table. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes locked on the hacksaw. Its blade was dull, stained with something dark. He didn't want to think about what it had been used for. The tape recorder, though it might tell them something. "Can you reach it?" Ethan asked. Mark stretched, but his chains were too short. He cursed under his breath. "No, you." Ethan tried, leaning forward until the cuffs dug into his wrists. His fingers brushed the edge of the table, but it was just out of reach. "Damn it," he muttered. Then, a sound, a low, mechanical click. The tape recorder whirred to life on its own. Both men froze as a voice filled the room. It was deep, distorted, like it had been run through a machine to hide the speaker's identity. "Hello, Ethan." "Hello, Mark," the voice said. "You don't know me, but I know you. You're here because you've taken your lives for granted. You've made choices that hurt others. Now, you'll make choices to survive." Ethan's blood ran cold. He glanced at Mark, who looked just as terrified. The voice continued. "In front of you is a table. On it, a tool and a note. One of you can reach it, but only if you're willing to pay a price. The chains that bind you are strong, but your will must be stronger. You have 1 hour. If you don't escape, the room will fill with gas, and you'll both die. The choice is yours. Let the game begin." The tape clicked off. Silence pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Mark's eyes were wide, darting between the table and his chains. "This is a joke, right? Some sick prank?" Ethan didn't think so. The pain in his wrists, the cold concrete, the voice it felt real. He tugged at his chains again, harder this time, ignoring the way they cut into his skin. "We need to get to that table," he said. Mark nodded, but his hands were trembling. "The hacksaw. You think we're supposed to?" He didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan knew what he meant. The saw was too small to cut through the chains or the bolts. It was meant for something else. Something worse. Ethan's eyes fell on the folded paper next to the saw. "The note," he said. Maybe it tells us what to do. Mark stretched again, grunting as the cuffs dug into his wrists. I can't reach it. It's too far. Ethan tried to, but the table was just out of his grasp. He looked at the hacksaw again, his stomach churning. We don't have a choice, he said. One of us has to try. Mark's face paled. Try what? You're not saying... I'm not saying anything, Ethan snapped. But we're not dying in here. Not like this. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. The bulb flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Ethan's mind raced. Who would do this? Why them? He didn't know. Mark. But the voice had said they'd both done something wrong. What had he done? He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a monster, was he? Mark's voice broke through his thoughts. I'm not cutting my hand off, he said, his voice rising. No way. There's got to be another way. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the hacksaw, its dull blade glinting under the flickering light. The voice had said they had 1 hour. He didn't know how much time had passed already, but the clock was ticking. They needed to act, or they'd both die. He looked at Mark, who was shaking his head, muttering to himself. We'll figure it out, Ethan said, trying to sound calm. We'll find a way. But deep down, he wasn't sure. The room, the chains, the saw, it all felt like a trap designed to break them. And the worst part, he had a feeling this was only the beginning. The first hour passed in a blur of panic and pain. Ethan and Mark took turns trying to reach the table, but their chains were too short. The cuffs had started to draw blood, leaving red streaks on their wrists. The hacksaw sat there, taunting them. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what it was meant for. The voice had said they'd hurt others. What did that mean? He thought about his life, his job, his family, the fights he'd had. Nothing stood out. Nothing that would land him here. Mark was worse off. He kept muttering about his wife, his kid. I didn't do anything, he said over and over. I'm a good guy. I don't deserve this. Ethan wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. What if Mark was lying? What if he'd done something terrible? What if they both had? The bulb flickered again, and for a moment, the room went dark. When the light came back, Ethan noticed something new. A small hatch in the corner of the ceiling, barely visible. It was too high to reach, even if they weren't chained. But it was something. A way out, maybe. Mark, Ethan said, pointing. Look. Mark followed his gaze, but his expression didn't change. We can't reach it, he said flatly. We're stuck. Ethan's jaw tightened. We're not giving up. We need to get to that table. The note might tell us something. Mark didn't move. He just stared at the hacksaw, his face pale. I'm not doing it, he said again. I'm not cutting anything. Ethan didn't want to either, but the ticking clock in his head was getting louder. They were running out of time. He looked at his wrists, already raw and bleeding, then at the saw, then at Mark. We don't have a choice, Ethan said quietly. One of us has to try. Mark's eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Neither of them wanted to say it, but they both knew. The game had started, and it wasn't going to stop. Ethan's hands shook as he stared at the table. The hacksaw gleamed under the flickering bulb, its rusty blade daring him to make a move. Mark was still slumped against the wall, his breathing ragged. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the room. Ethan's wrist ached, the cuffs rubbing his skin raw. He could feel time slipping away, the voices warning echoing in his head. 1 hour, or the room fills with gas. We can't just sit here, Ethan said, his voice sharper than he meant. We need that note. Mark didn't look up. You get it, then, he muttered. I'm not touching that saw. Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't want to touch it either. The thought of what it might be for made his stomach churn. But doing nothing wasn't an option. He leaned forward again, stretching until the chains pulled tight. His fingers brushed the table's edge, but the note was too far. He cursed under his breath. Help me, Ethan said. Maybe if we both try, we can tip the table or something. Mark finally looked at him. His one good eye narrowed. Tip it. You think that's gonna work? We're chained to the damn wall. Ethan ignored him and kept stretching. His shoulders burned and the cuffs dug deeper. But he didn't care. He had to do something. His fingers grazed the table again, and this time, he felt it wobble slightly. It's not bolted down, he said, hope flickering in his chest. If we push together, we might knock it closer. Mark hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But if this doesn't work, I'm done. They both leaned forward, chains clinking as they stretched toward the table. Ethan's fingers hooked the edge, and Mark managed to get a hand on the other side. On 3, Ethan said, 1, 2, 3, push. The table screeched as it slid a few inches toward Ethan. The hacksaw wobbled, but didn't fall. The note fluttered to the edge, close, enough for Ethan to grab. He snatched it, his heart pounding, and sat back, panting. The paper was damp, stained with something brownish, maybe blood, maybe rust. He didn't want to know. Read it, Mark said, his voice low. What's it say? Ethan unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was messy, scrawled, in black ink. He read it aloud, his voice shaking. To move forward, you must leave something behind. The tool is your key, but it demands sacrifice. One of you must lose what holds you back. The other must decide who pays the price. Choose wisely, or the room will choose for you. Mark's face went pale. What the hell does that mean? Sacrifice? Lose what? Ethan's eyes flicked to the hacksaw. He didn't want to say it, but the words burned in his mind. The saw wasn't for the chains. It was for them, for their flesh. He shoved the thought away and crumpled the note in his fist. It's trying to mess with us, he said. Make us panic. It's working, Mark snapped. You think I'm cutting off my hand, my foot? No way. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about the voice, the way it had known their names. It had said they'd hurt others. Ethan's mind drifted to his life, his job as a mechanic, the long hours, the fights with his girlfriend, Sarah. He'd yelled at her more times than he could count, but nothing bad enough to deserve this. Had he hurt someone without realizing it? Cheated someone? Ignored something important? What did you do? Ethan asked suddenly. Looking at Mark, the voice said, we hurt people. What did you do? Mark's eyes widened, then narrowed. Me. What about you? I'm just a guy. I've got a wife, a kid. I work at a warehouse. I don't hurt people. Then why are you here? Ethan pressed. Why are we both here? I don't know. Mark shouted, yanking at his chains. The cuffs bit into his wrists, and he winced. Maybe you're the one who screwed up. Ever think of that? Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but a noise stopped him. A low, grinding sound, like metal on metal, coming from the corner of the room. The hatch in the ceiling, the one Ethan had noticed before, was moving. It creaked open, and something fell through, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The hatch slammed shut again. Both men stared at the object. It was a small metal box, no bigger than a show box, with a hinged lid. It looked old, rusted, like everything else in this place. Ethan's heart sank. Whatever was in that box, it wasn't good. Don't touch it, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. It's another trap. We can't ignore it, Ethan said. It might be a way out, or it might kill us. Mark shot back. You want to play their game? Go ahead. I'm staying right here. Ethan ignored him and stretched toward the box. It was closer than the table, just within reach. His fingers brushed the cold metal, and he dragged it toward himself. The box was heavier than it looked, and something inside rattled. He hesitated, then flipped open the lid. Inside was a syringe filled with a cloudy liquid, a small key, and another folded note. Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't want to read it, but he knew he had to. He unfolded the note and read it silently first, his hands shaking. The key unlocks one chain, but it comes at a cost. The syringe holds relief from pain, but it will cloud your mind. One of you must use it. The other must decide who is freed. You have 10 minutes, or the choice will be made for you. Mark's eyes were wide. What's it say? Ethan read. In a loud, his voice flat. When he finished, Mark shook his head. No way. I'm not injecting myself with some mystery drug. Ethan stared at the syringe. The liquid inside looked wrong, like it didn't belong in a human body. But the key could free one of them. Maybe it would unlock the cuffs, or the hatch, or something else. We don't have 10 minutes to argue, Ethan said. We need to decide. You decide, Mark snapped. You're so eager to play along. You take the needle. Ethan's grip tightened on the box. He didn't want to use the syringe either, but the clock was ticking. He could feel it, even without a watch. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. The bulb flickered again, and for a split second, Ethan thought he saw something in the shadows, a shape, watching them. But when the light steadied, it was gone. We can't just sit here, Ethan said. One of us has to do it, Mark's face twisted. Why should I trust you? For all I know, you're in on this. Maybe you're the one who put us here. Ethan stared at him, anger rising. You think I'd chain myself up in this hellhole? You're out of your mind. Then, why us? Mark shouted. Why me? I didn't do anything. Ethan didn't have an answer. He looked at the syringe, then at the key. One of them had to make a choice. One of them had to take the risk. But who and what would happen if they didn't? The grinding noise came again, louder this time. The hatch in the ceiling creaked, and Ethan's heart stopped. Something was coming. They were running out of time. The grinding noise from the hatch stopped, leaving the room in suffocating silence. Ethan clutched the metal box, the syringe and key rattling inside. The note's words burned in his mind. One of you must use it. The other must decide. Who was freed? 10 minutes. That's what the note said. How much time was left? 5 minutes. Less. The flickering bulb cast long shadows, making the walls feel like they were closing in. Mark's eyes were fixed on the syringe, his face pale. I'm not doing it, he said again, his voice shaking. That stuff could kill us. Ethan's grip tightened on the box. We don't have time to argue. If we don't choose, we both die. Mark leaned back against the wall, his chains clinking. Then you do it. You're so eager to play their game. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wasn't eager. He was terrified. But sitting here, waiting for the gas the voice promised, wasn't an option. He looked at the syringe, its cloudy liquid swirling under the dim light. It could be poison. It could be something worse. But the key, small, rusted, glinting next to it, promised a way out. Maybe it would unlock his cuffs. Maybe it would open the hatch. Maybe it was a lie. I'll do it, Ethan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't want to see the relief or suspicion in his eyes. Mark's head snapped up. You serious? Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. One of us has to. You're not volunteering, so it's me. Mark didn't say anything, but Ethan could feel his stare. He picked up the syringe, its weight cold and heavy in his hand. His stomach twisted as he pressed the needle against his arm. What if it killed him? What if it made him pass out, leaving Mark to take the key? He pushed the thought away. He had to trust there was a way out. He had to. Do it, Mark said, his voice low. Hurry up. Ethan took a deep breath and plunged the needle into his arm. The liquid burned as it entered, like fire spreading through his veins. He gasped, dropping the syringe. It clattered to the floor, empty. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his vision blurred, and his head felt heavy, like it was filled with wet sand. He slumped against the wall, his chains pulling tight. Ethan. Mark's voice sounded far away. You okay? Ethan tried to answer, but his tongue felt thick. The room spun, the bulbs flickered, slowing to a crawl. His body felt wrong, like it wasn't his anymore. But through the haze, he felt something else, numbness, The pain in his wrists, the ache in his shoulders. It was fading. The note had said the syringe held relief from pain. It wasn't mine. But at what cost? Mark was saying something, but Ethan couldn't focus. He forced his eyes open and saw Mark reaching for the box. What are you doing? Ethan slurred. Mark grabbed the key, his hands shaking. You took the needle. I'm taking the key. Ethan's heart lurched. Wait, we don't know what it does. Mark ignored him and jammed the key into his cuff's lock. It turned with a click, and the cuff snapped open. Mark's wrist was free, red and raw but free. He stared at it, like he couldn't believe it. Then he tried the key on his other cuff. It didn't fit. What the hell? Mark muttered. He tried his ankle cuffs. No luck. The key only worked once. Ethan's head was clearing, but his body still felt heavy. Try mine, he said, holding out his wrist. Mark hesitated, his eyes darting to the hatch for a moment. Ethan thought he'd bolt, leave him chained. But Mark crawled over, dragging his remaining chains, and tried the key in Ethan's cuff. It didn't work. He tried the other wrist, then the ankles. Nothing. It's useless, Mark said, tossing the key to the floor. One cuff. That's all we get, Ethan's stomach sank. The note had said the key would free one of them, but it was a trick. It only loosened one chain. Not enough to escape. The room was still a cage. He looked at Mark, who was rubbing his freed wrist, his face a mix of relief and fear. You feel anything? Mark asked. From the needle? Ethan nodded slowly. It's numbing. My arms don't hurt anymore, but my head's foggy. Mark's eyes narrowed. You think it's poison. If it was, I'd be dead already, Ethan said, but he wasn't sure. The numbness was spreading, making his legs feel like they were floating. He didn't trust it. A new sound broke the silence, a hiss, faint, but growing louder. It came from the hatch. Ethan's heart stopped. Was it the gas? The voice had said the room would fill with gas if they didn't escape. He looked up, but the hatch was closed. The hiss was coming from somewhere else, maybe the walls. Do you hear that? Ethan asked. Mark nodded, his face pale. It's starting. We're out of time. Ethan's eyes darted to the hacksaw on the table. It was still there, untouched, its blade glinting like it was mocking them. The note's words echoed in his head. The tool is your key, but it demands sacrifice. He hadn't wanted to think about it, but now it was clear. The syringe and key were just the start. The real choice was coming. We need to move, Ethan said, his voice shaking. That's all. It's our only way out. Mark's eyes widened. No, I told you. I'm not cutting anything. Then what? Ethan snapped. We sit here and die. You heard the hiss. The gas is coming. Mark shook his head, backing against the wall. There's got to be another way. Maybe the hatch. We can't reach it, Ethan shouted. His head was still foggy, but anger cut through the haze. You got one cuff off. You can move better than me. Check the room. Look for something. Anything. Mark hesitated, then nodded. With one hand free, he could stretch farther. He crawled along the floor, his chains dragging, and checked the corners of the room. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. The hissing grew louder, and now he could smell it, something sharp, chemical, like bleach mixed with rot. Mark stopped near the table and squinted at the floor. There's something here, he said. He brushed away dirt, revealing a small grate in the concrete, no bigger than a book. It was rusted, with tiny holes letting out faint wisps of the chemical smell. That's where it's coming from, Ethan said, his voice tight. The gas. Mark yanked at the grate, but it was sealed tight. We need something to pry it open, he said. The saw might work. Ethan's stomach twisted. The saw again. Everything came back to it. He looked at Mark, who was staring at the grate like it was his only hope. But Ethan's mind drifted, unbidden, to a memory. Him and Sarah arguing in their apartment. Her crying, saying he never listened, that he was selfish. He'd stormed out, ignored her calls for days. Was that why he was here? Was that his sin? What did you do? Ethan asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the hiss. The voice said we hurt people. What did you do to get us here? Mark froze, his hand on the grate. I told you, I didn't do anything. I'm a good guy. Nobody's a clean, Ethan said. You've got a wife, a kid. You ever heard them yell at them? Worse. Mark's face darkened. Don't talk about my family. You don't know me. Then tell me. Ethan pressed. Why are we here? Mark didn't answer. He turned back to the grate, his hands shaking. We need to focus. Get the saw. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Mark was hiding something. But there was no time to push. The hissing was louder now, the chemical smell stinging his nose. His head was still foggy from the syringe, but he could feel the numbness fading, replaced by a dull ache. Whatever was in the needle, it wasn't just for pain relief. It was changing him, slowing him down. Get the hiss of gas grew louder, a relentless whisper filling the room. Ethan's nose burned with the chemical stench, and his eyes stung. The bulb above flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced across the concrete walls. Mark was still, crouched by the grate, his freed hand clawing at the rusted metal. But it wouldn't budge. Ethan's head throbbed, the effects of the syringe fading, leaving behind a dull ache that pulsed through his body. He felt sluggish, like his blood had thickened. We're out of time, Ethan said, his voice hoarse. He stared at the hacksaw on the table, its rusty blade glinting like it was alive, waiting. The note's words echoed in his mind. The tool is your key, but it demands sacrifice. He knew what it meant now. The saw wasn't for the chains or the grate. It was for them. Mark looked up, his face slick with sweat. Don't say it, he muttered. I'm not doing it. Then what? Ethan snapped. You want to choke on this gas. You smell that, right? It's not a bluff. Mark's eyes darted to the saw, then back to the grate. We can pry this open. Use the saw on the grate, not on us. Ethan wanted to believe it, but the grate looked solid, welded into the concrete. The saw's blade was dull, barely sharp enough for metal. He glanced at his wrists, raw and bloody from the cuffs, then at Mark's freed hand, the one cuff dangling. Uselessly, the key had been a trick, giving them hope only to snatch it away. The saw was the real answer, and they both knew it. Try it, Ethan said, nodding at the table. Get the saw, see if it works on the grate. Mark hesitated, his chest heaving. He crawled back to the table, his remaining chains dragging across the floor. With his free hand, he grabbed the hacksaw, his fingers trembling as he gripped the handle. He looked at Ethan, then at the blade, like he was waiting for permission or an excuse to put it down. Do it, Ethan said. Hurry. Mark shuffled back to the grate and jammed the saw's blade into the edge. Scraping at the rust, the metal screeched, but the grate didn't move. He saw it harder, his arm shaking with effort, but the blade barely scratched the surface. It's not working, he panted. It's too dull. Ethan's stomach twisted. He'd known it wouldn't work. The saw wasn't meant for the grate. He looked at his chained wrists, then at Mark's. The voice had said they'd hurt others. It wanted them to pay, to sacrifice. His mind flashed to Sarah again, her face red from crying, her voice begging him to stay. He'd walked out, left her alone. Was that enough to land him here? Or was there something worse he'd buried, something he didn't want to remember? What did you do? Mark, Ethan asked, his voice low. You keep saying you're a good guy, but nobody's here for nothing. Mark stopped sawing and glared at him. Shut up. You don't get to judge me. What about you? What did you do to end up in this hole? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His memories were a blur. Fights, long nights at the bar. He'd hurt people, sure, but nothing like this. Nothing that deserved this. Just keep trying, he said, nodding at the grate. Mark shook his head and tossed the saw down. It clattered against the concrete, the sound sharp in the hissing air. It's useless. This whole thing's a game. They want us to. He trailed off, his eyes flicking to his chained ankle. Ethan followed his gaze. The cuffs were tight, cutting into Mark's skin, but they weren't as thick as the wall bolts. The saw could cut through flesh and bone easier than steel Ethan's. Throat tightened. Don't, he said. Don't even think it. Then what? Mark shouted, his voice cracking. You want to die here. You smell the gas. My eyes are burning. We're running out of time. Ethan's chest tightened. The air was thicker now, the chemical smell making his head spin. He coughed, his lungs stinging. Mark was right, they couldn't wait. But the thought of the saw cutting through skin, through bone, made him want to vomit. He looked at Mark, who was staring at the saw like it was a snake ready to strike. I'll do it, Ethan said suddenly Amin, his voice shaking. He didn't know if he meant it, but he couldn't sit still anymore. The gas was real, the threat was real, and the saw was their only way out. Mark's head snapped up. What? I'll do it, Ethan repeated. Give me the saw. Mark stared at him, his face pale. You're crazy. You'll bleed out. Maybe, Ethan said, but we're dead if we don't. You want to wait for the gas to finish us. Mark didn't move. Ethan leaned forward, his chains rattling, and grabbed the saw from the floor. It was heavier than it looked, the handle rough against his palm. He stared at his left wrist, the one still chained tight. The cuff was embedded in his skin now, blood trickling down his hand. He imagined the blade cutting through his wrist, the pain, the blood. His stomach lurched, but he gripped the saw tighter. You're not serious, Mark said. His voice barely a whisper. Ethan didn't answer. He placed the blade against his wrist, just above the cuff. His hand shook, and his heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. He pressed down, the dull teeth biting into his skin. A thin line of blood welled up, and he stopped, gasping. The pain was sharp, electric. Ethan, don't, Mark said, crawling closer. You'll die. Ethan ignored him. He pressed harder, the blade scraping against bone. Pain exploded up his arm, and he bit back a scream. Blood poured, pulling on the concrete, his vision blurred. But he kept sawing, each movement slower, weaker. The room spun, the hissing gas louder in his ears. Stop, Mark shouted, lunging forward. He grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking the saw away. It clattered to the floor, slick with blood. You're gonna kill yourself. Ethan slumped back, panting, his wrist throbbing. Blood dripped steadily, forming a dark puddle. We have to. He gasped. No other way. Mark's face was white. There's gotta be something else. The hatch, maybe. It's too high. Ethan snapped, his voice weak. We're trapped. Mark's eyes darted to the saw, then to Ethan's bleeding wrist. Give me the saw, he said suddenly. Ethan blinked, his head fuzzy. What? I'll do it, Mark said, his voice trembling. You're already hurt. I'll try. Ethan stared at him, unsure if he heard right. Mark's hands shook as he picked up the saw. He looked at his chained ankle, then at Ethan. If I die, tell my wife I'm sorry, he said. Ethan's throat tightened. Mark, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Mark cut him off. He positioned the saw above his ankle, his breathing ragged. You took the needle. You tried the saw. It's my turn. Before Ethan could stop him, Mark pressed the blade down. A choke scream tore from his throat as blood sprayed, splattering the floor. He sawed once, twice, his face contorted in pain. Ethan's stomach churned, but he couldn't look away. Mark's hands shook violently, the saw slipping. Blood poured, mixing with Ethan's on the concrete. Mark, stop, Ethan yelled. But Mark kept going, his screams echoing in the small room. The blade hit bone, and Mark's eyes rolled back. He collapsed, the saw falling from his hand, his ankle a mangled mess. Ethan crawled toward him, his own wrist bleeding, his chains dragging. Mark, wake up. He shook him, but Mark didn't move. His chest rose and fell faintly, but he was out cold. The gas hissed louder, the air thick with its stench. Ethan's eyes watered, his lungs burning. He grabbed the saw, his hands slick with blood. His wrist screamed with pain, but he had no choice. Mark was down. The gas was coming. He placed the blade back on his wrist, took a shaky breath, and started cutting again. The air was thick with gas now, a sickly yellow haze curling from the grate in the floor. Ethan's lungs burned with every breath, and his eyes streamed tears that blurred his vision. The bulb above flickered wildly, casting the room in a strobe of light and shadow. Blood pooled around him, his wrist a raw mess from the hacksaw. The pain was unbearable, a white-hot fire that pulsed with his heartbeat. Mark lay slumped against the wall, his ankle a bloody ruin, his chest barely moving. Ethan didn't know if he was alive or dead, and he didn't have time to check. He gripped the hacksaw, his hands slick with blood and sweat. His arm trembled as he pressed the blade back into his wrist, right above the cuff each cut sent a jolt of agony through him. But he couldn't stop. The gas was thicker now, stinging his throat, making his head spin. The voice's warning echoed in his mind. 1 hour, or the room will fill with gas. How much time was left? Minutes, seconds. He didn't know, but he could feel death creeping closer. Stay awake, Ethan muttered to himself. His voice slurred. The syringe's effects lingered, making his body feel heavy, detached. His vision swam, and for a moment, he saw Sarah standing in the corner of the room. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. "You left me," she whispered. "You always leave." Ethan blinked, and she was gone. A hallucination. The gas, the syringe, the pain it was messing with his head. He shook it off and kept sawing, the blade grinding against bone. Blood poured, pulling with marks on the concrete. His stomach churned. But he forced himself to focus. He had to get free. He had to. A loud creak snapped him out of his haze. The hatch in the ceiling groaned open, and a faint light spilled into the room, dim, gray, like dawn through a dirty window. Ethan's heart leapt. Was it a way out? He squinted through the gas, his eyes burning. The hatch was too high to reach, but something was moving up there. A shadow, a figure. "Hey," Ethan croaked, his voice weak. "Help us, please." The shadow didn't move. It just watched, silent, its shape blurred by the gas. Then, something dropped from the hatch, a small metal cylinder, no bigger than a soda can. It hit the floor with a clang and rolled toward the table. The hatch slammed shut, plunging the room back into flickering gloom. Ethan's chest tightened. Another trap. He dragged himself closer, his chains clanking, and grabbed the cylinder. It was cold, heavy, with a small latch on one side. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was another note, folded tight, and a single razor blade, its edge glinting sharper than the hacksaw's dull teeth. He unfolded the note, his blood-smeared fingers staining the paper. The handwriting was the same, scrawled and uneven. He read it aloud, his voice barely audible over the hissing gas. "The saw is slow, but the blade is quick. To open the door, you must open yourself. One must bleed to free the other. The choice is yours. But time is not." Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at the razor blade, then at the table. There was no door in the room, just the hatch, the grate, and the concrete walls. But the note's meaning was clear. More blood, more pain. He glanced at Mark, still unconscious, his face pale as death. Ethan's wrist was already mangled, but he wasn't free. The saw wasn't enough. The razor blade was the next step. His mind spun, dragging him back to another memory. Not Sarah this time, but his brother, Jake. They were kids, fighting over a stolen bike. Ethan had pushed him hard, and Jake's head hit the curb. Blood everywhere. Their mom screaming. Jake was fine, eventually. But Ethan never forgot the look in his eyes, betrayal, fear. Was that why he was here? For hurting his brother all those years ago? Focus? Ethan whispered, shaking his head. The gas was thicker now, curling around his legs like fog. His lungs felt heavy, like he was breathing water. He picked up the razor blade, its edge catching the light. It was sharper than the saw, cleaner. he could end it faster. But where? His wrist was already a mess. His ankle, his arm. The note said he had to open himself. What did that mean? He crawled to Mark, wincing as his chains pulled tight. "Mark, wake up," he said, shaking him. Mark's head lulled, but his chest still moved, shallow and slow. Ethan slapped his face, leaving a bloody handprint. "Come on, man. I need you," Mark groaned, his eyes fluttering. "What?" he mumbled, his voice weak. "The hatch," Ethan said, pointing up. Something dropped. Another note, a razor blade. Mark's good eye widened, focusing on the blade in Ethan's hand. No more cutting," he whispered. "I can't, we don't have a choice," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "The gas is killing us. Look at it." He gestured at the yellow haze, now so thick it obscured the far wall. "We need to do this." Mark shook his head, his face twisted in pain. "You do it. You're already halfway there." Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to scream, to shake Mark until he understood. But Mark was right, he'd already started. His wrist was a bloody wreck, the bone half exposed. The razor blade could finish it. He looked at the note again. One must bleed to free the other. Did that mean only one of them could escape? Or was it another trick? He pressed the razor against his wrist, just below the saw's cuts. The blade was so sharp it barely hurt at first, just a cold sting. Blood welled up, faster than before, running down his arm. His vision blurred again, and Sarah's face flashed. In his mind, "You never cared," she said, her voice sharp. "You left me to rot." "Stop," Ethan muttered, blinking her away. He cut deeper, the pain hitting now, a scream trapped in his throat. The cuff was loose, slick with blood, but it still held. He needed more. He needed. A loud click echoed through the room. Ethan froze, the razor slipping from his hand. The grate in the floor, the one leaking gas, popped open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a key, larger than the last one, and another tape recorder. The gas hissed louder, pouring from the open grate, but the key glinted like a promise. Ethan's heart raced. He dropped the razor and crawled toward the grate, his chains dragging. His wrists bled heavily, each movement agony. But he reached the compartment and grabbed the key. It was heavier, colder, with a strange symbol etched into it, a circle with a jagged line through it. "Mark," Ethan gasped, holding up the key. "Look." Mark lifted his head, his face gray. What is it?" "A key," Ethan said. "Maybe it's for the hatch." He tried it in his remaining cuff. It didn't fit. He tried Mark's ankle cuff. Nothing. His hope faded, replaced by dread. The gas was so thick now he could barely see Mark's face. He pressed the tape recorder's play button, desperate for answers. The same distorted voice filled the room. "Congratulations, Ethan. You've bled for your freedom. The key unlocks the final choice. But only one can leave. Use it or lose it. The game ends now." Ethan's blood ran cold. Only one can leave. He looked at Mark, then at the key, his hand trembling. The gas was choking him, his lungs screaming. He had to decide. But what? The gas was a thick yellow fog now, choking the room, swallowing the flickering light. Ethan's lungs screamed with every breath, each one shallower than the last. His wrist was a mangled ruin, blood pooling beneath him, mixing with the crimson stains from Mark's ankle. The key in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Its strange symbol, a circle with a jagged line burning into his palm. The tape's words echoed in his head. Only one can leave. Mark was still slumped against the wall, unconscious, his chest barely moving. Ethan was alone with the choice, and time was gone. He crawled to the hatch, dragging his chains, the key clutched tight. The gas stung his eyes, blurring the world into smears of gray and yellow. His head pounded, the syringe's lingering fog mixing with the gas's poison. He saw Sarah again, standing in the corner, her face twisted with anger. "You did this," she hissed. "You broke us." "Not real," Ethan gasped, shaking his head. But the vision shifted. It wasn't Sarah now, it was Jake, his brother, blood dripping from his temple. Just like that day with the bite. "You pushed me," Jake said. "You didn't care." Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered now. After the bike fight, he'd never apologized. Jake had changed after that, grown quiet, distant. Ethan had ignored it, too wrapped up in his own life, his job, his fights with Sarah, his nights at the bar. He'd hurt people, left them behind. Was that why he was here? To pay for it all? He reached the wall beneath the hatch, his bloody wrist screaming as he stretched upward. The hatch was high, but with one cuff loose from Mark's key, he could stand, barely. He jammed the new key into the hatch's lock, his hand shaking. It turned with a heavy click. The hatch creaked open, and a gust of cold air hit his face, cutting through the gas. For a moment, hope flared. Freedom. A way out. But the hatch didn't lead outside. It opened to a narrow shaft, barely wide enough for one person, with rusted metal walls and a ladder leading up into darkness. At the base of the ladder was another tapered quarter, its red light blinking like an eye. Ethan's stomach dropped. Another trap, another game. He grabbed the recorder, his fingers slipping in blood. He pressed play, and the distorted voice filled the room, calm and cold. "Congratulations, Ethan, you've reached the final choice. The ladder leads to freedom, but only one can climb. The hatch will close in 2 minutes. Choose who lives, choose who dies, or the room will choose for you." Ethan's heart stopped. He looked at Mark, still unconscious, blood pooling around his mangled ankle. The gas was so thick now Ethan could barely see him. 2 minutes. He had 2 minutes to decide. His mind raced, dragging him back to another memory. Mark's voice, earlier, pleading about his wife and kid. "Tell my wife I'm sorry," he'd said. Ethan hadn't asked why, but now, another image flickered through the gas's haze. Mark, not as he was now, but in a warehouse, yelling at someone, a young guy, maybe a coworker. The guy was on the ground, clutching his face. Mark's fist was bloody. Ethan blinked. The vision fading. Was it real? The gas, the syringe, they were twisting his mind, showing him things. But it felt true. Mark wasn't clean. He'd hurt someone, just like Ethan had. They were both guilty, both trapped, but only one could leave. Ethan looked at the ladder, then at the key in his hand. He could climb now, leave Mark behind. Mark was barely alive. Anyway, Ethan's wrist was ruined, but he could still move, still fight. He deserved to live, didn't he? He'd taken the syringe, used the saw, the razor. He'd paid the price. But Mark's words echoed. "I've got a wife, a kid." Ethan had no one. Sarah was gone. Jake hadn't spoken to him in years. If he died here, who would care? He shook his head, coughing as the gas burned his lungs. No, he wasn't a martyr. He wasn't going to die for Mark, a stranger who might be just as bad as him. He started climbing, his bloody hands slipping on the rungs. Each step was agony, his wrist throbbing, his legs weak from blood loss. The gas followed him, curling up the shaft, but the air was clearer here, enough to keep him conscious. He looked down at Mark, a faint shape in the yellow fog. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, though he knew Mark couldn't hear. Halfway up, the ladder shook. A loud clang echoed below, and the hatch began to close. Ethan's heart raced. He climbed faster, ignoring the pain, the blood dripping down his arm. The hatch was almost shut now, a sliver of light shrinking. He reached the top, his fingers brushing a metal panel. Another lock. He jammed the key in, twisting it with a desperate prayer. It clicked. The panel swung open, revealing a small platform and a door. Rusted, heavy, but a door. Freedom. Ethan's chest heaved, tears mixing with the blood on his face. He'd made it. He'd a scream cut through the air. Below, Mark was awake, clawing at the ladder, his face twisted in pain and panic. "Ethan," he shouted, his voice raw. "Don't leave me." Ethan froze, his hand on the door. The hatch was closed now, trapping Mark in the gas-filled room. Ethan could hear him coughing, choking. "Please," Mark screamed. "I have a kid." Ethan's stomach twisted. He looked at the door, then back at the hatch. The tape had said only one could leave. The key had worked. But for what? To save himself and let Mark die. His mind flashed to Jake again, to Sarah, to the people he'd hurt by walking away. Was this who he was? Someone who left others behind? He slammed his fist against the door, screaming in frustration. The gas was seeping up the shaft now, stinging his eyes. He had seconds to decide. He could go back, try to help Mark, but the hatch was locked again, and he had no key. Or he could open the door and live. "I'm sorry," Ethan said again, his voice breaking. He turned the door's handle and stumbled through. The air outside was cold, sharp, like a slap. He fell to his knees on a concrete floor, gasping. The room was different, larger, cleaner, with a single bulb overhead. A table sat in the center, holding another tape recorder. Ethan's heart sank. The game wasn't over. He staggered to the table and pressed play. The voice returned, colder now. "Well done, Ethan. You chose yourself. But the game never ends. To live, you must keep choosing. Look behind you." Ethan turned, his legs shaking. A monitor flickered to life on the wall, showing the room he'd left. Mark was still there, writhing in the gas, his screams muffled. The screen zoomed in on his face, his eyes wide with terror, blood dripping from his mouth. Then it cut to another image, a woman and a young girl, sitting in a living room, unaware. Mark's wife and kid. "No," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "No, please." The voice continued. "You chose to live, but choices have consequences. Their fate is in your hands. Another key, another game. Find it, or they pay for your freedom." Ethan sank to the floor, the weight of it crushing him. The door behind him locked with a click. He was free, but not really. The game would never let him go. He saw Sarah's face again, Jake's, Mark's, all the people he'd failed, all the choices he'd made. He screamed, the sound echoing in the empty room, as the monitor flickered and the voice laughed, low and distorted, promising more pain, more choices, forever.